Ready. Okay. Good evening, everybody. My name is Jonathan Agan, and I am one of the presenters on the Brightbod.com website. I host the Advocacy and Caregiver Group 101. Tonight, we're going to be talking about creating positive interactions with your clinical care teams, whether as a patient yourself or as a caregiver. First slide just tells a little bit about my background, current roles, and my experience. I'm going to try and do this in a little bit more of an interactive fashion tonight, giving more opportunity during the course of the presentation to ask questions and offer your own experience as well. After all, that's what this forum is all about. It's creating a community that people can interact together on. Now, I've gone ahead and muted everybody at this point. If for some reason you do have something to share, hopefully, or have a question, just please go ahead and either signal me, raise your hand. There is a function which should hopefully allow you to signal me that you do want to ask questions. If not, at the end, we'll go through some more questions as well. So, without further ado, let's get into tonight's presentation. Outline. We're going to talk about who makes up the clinical care team. And it's not a simple answer as just a doctor or a nurse. A lot more involved than that. What type of interactions, when interactions occur, it's not as simple as it used to be because of the advent of email and texting. I've texted some of my family members' doctors before. Tips for maintaining positive interactions. And then what happens when things go bad? And things can go bad in dealing with your clinical care team, and what considerations to think about when something happens. And then something I like to do at the close to the end is a slide I call considerations. And these are things that we may have touched on, but can use some more highlighting, or things that should just keep in mind as we go forward. Again, as an advocate or a caregiver for somebody, interacting with that person's clinical care team is extremely critical to ensure that they're receiving the proper care, and if they're not, being able to do something about it. So, who is on the clinical care team? This can be a very open-ended question, frankly. So, the experience I come into with in presenting is in relation to the diagnosis of my daughter back in April of 2008 with a terminal brain tumor. She was 27 months old at the time. She couldn't speak up on her own behalf, and her mother and I were her advocates on her clinical care team, were her main treating physicians, and there were two main neuro-oncologists that we consulted with. There were some other neuro-oncologists that we got advice from along the way as well. There's a clinical oncologist. There were nurses that we would ask for when we went to clinic. There were phlebotomists who drew her blood that we knew were good with her and could find her veins. There were nurses that we did not want near her. There were physicians we didn't want near her. There were administrators. There were people designated from my daughter's insurance, her healthcare insurance, that checked up on us on a weekly, bi-monthly basis. The entire team was part of her treatment, and it was necessary to make sure that we maintained this team. And when we needed to, we brought somebody else into the team, or if somebody stepped off the team, we either filled the slot or left the slot open. Before her diagnosis, I would have never thought to have somebody from the insurance company involved in the clinical care team. somebody trying to make sure that she was getting the actual care that she needed and deserved. That's not something that we always think about in terms of interacting with an insurance carrier. We always think of the insurance carrier as trying to stop us from getting treatment or to question the treatments. In this case, because of the diagnosis, this person was very, very critical to interacting with our on-the-ground team to make sure that the records were being maintained properly, that she was getting a complete copy of every single medical record from every single provider. If you're talking about a cancer diagnosis and you're getting radiation, then you've got a radiation oncologist, and you've got the people that actually set up the dosing of the radiation. It's not as straightforward from point A to point B as you would think in general, and it can be quite complex in nature. One of my close friends has a son that has an autoinflammatory condition that doesn't have a name to it. And so he is a patient of one, and he's treated by a neurology team in his hometown, and he's also treated here in Bethesda, Maryland. I'm in Falls Church, Virginia, so I'm right outside of Bethesda, Maryland, but he's treated at the National Institutes of Health, and he sees rheumatologists and geneticists and allergists and eye doctors, and she has found that the clinical care team doesn't always communicate together. So it's up to her as his caregiver, as his parent, to ensure that everybody's on the same page. So as you go forward to try and obtain treatment for yourself or a loved one, think through who else could you put on the team? Who would be beneficial? Do you need a patient advocate? There are groups that provide patient advocates for you if you need one, if you need assistance obtaining care, medicine, drugs, whatever it may be. It's not as straightforward as it may seem. So does anybody have any people that they want to share on a team that they may have set up for themselves or a caregiver that I haven't touched on? Anybody unique that you found that you may have needed in the course of the treatment and care of either yourself or a loved one? If not, I'll go forward.
Since you gave us the opportunity, you were saying there are groups that provide caregivers or groups that provide advocates, rather.
Yes.
What are some of those groups, if you know?
It's different. Different disease populations have advocates that are available, and based upon age and based upon insurance. The best thing to do to find an advocate is just go on the computer and Google it, and you will find groups that are available or individuals that act as patient advocates, depending on what the scenario is. Different diseases require different focuses. With cancer, especially in children, drugs that are available on the adult level aren't always available for the pediatric population. In fact, in the last 23 years, only 3 new drugs have been approved by the FDA specifically for childhood cancer, whereas just last year alone, 16 new adult oncology drugs were approved by the FDA. So as science gets better at understanding the genetic makeup of cancer, whether it be on the adult level or pediatric level, more genetic targets are available for these drugs. The problem is they're not always available for children. So people like myself, you can Google me and find my website that I have. I oftentimes help out in situations where people need to obtain drugs. But I know that sometimes legal aid societies can help in terms of assisting you to obtain treatments. I've heard of situations of that nature. different societies, American Cancer Society can guide you. Live Strong. If we're talking cancer, start with the biggest organization you can find with respect to the specific disease, and they can assist you and guide you in terms of locating an advocate. Anybody else want to share or have a question with respect to somebody who may be on the clinical care team or that you've had to employ within the clinical care team? Okay, I'm gonna move along here. Oh, somebody have something?
Oh, I was gonna say, not just medical wise, but I'm also thinking of spiritual also caretaking.
Oh, absolutely. No, that's a good point.
Whereby,
yeah, no, that's a very good point that the spiritual component can't be overlooked, especially if you're dealing with a serious or life-threatening condition. Getting your life's affairs in order, getting your loved one's life affairs in order. That's a very good point. And that certainly was something that we brought in as well when we needed. So thank you. Anybody else? Okay, thank you. That was really good. Okay, let's move on here. When do certain interactions occur? This is fairly straightforward, but nonetheless, there are points and times when you may get an interaction with a clinical care team that you're not expecting. But of course, first time is upon diagnosis. You go to the clinic, go to your doctor, and you're told that you have whatever disease it is, or in our case, you're told that your child has a malignant brain tumor that her prognosis is 9 to 12 months. From there, the interactions can increase dramatically. That's when we started interacting with everybody on the team. I had no idea that we'd be interacting with social workers, interacting with the insurance company the way we were interacting with them, interacting with the various nursing units, the radiation oncologist and his team. It spirals. And so you're not prepared for these interactions. You're not prepared to go forward with a lot of these interactions, but it doesn't matter. Life moves very quickly once the diagnosis occurs, whatever it may be. During the course of treatment, on any typical day, let's take, my example of my daughter. We would go to the clinic and she would be seen by the nurse who would take her blood pressure, weigh her, take her height, check her pulse, her oxygen levels, and then she would move to the phlebotomist. She'd have her blood drawn, and then she would move into the treatment room. And then in the treatment room, the first nurse would come in, and then the second nurse would come in, and then the clinical oncologist would come in, and then the art therapist would come in, and then the next doctor would come in. And the interactions kept coming and coming and coming. And this is just in one visit alone. We could see 5, 6, 7, 8 people in one visit. If we were at the hospital for treatment, it even was increased over that. You could be seeing 8, 9, 10 people. And not everybody obviously has the same disposition or personality. So you're going to find people across the board that you're going to have to interact with. And you never know what type of day they're having, whether it's a good day or a bad day. And so on clinical visits or labs, just going to have your labs drawn could be 2 or 3 people that you're interacting with, from the person up front to the person drawing your labs or whatever the test may be. You should always be prepared to interact with anybody who comes your way. And as I get further along the presentation, I'll share some instances of positive interactions and negative interactions and what happened and the lessons I've learned from that. But knowing that there are any number of interactions that you're going to have with your quote-unquote clinical care team is helpful. And this doesn't even touch upon the emails or the phone calls or the texts. I was always taken aback at the choices that some of the doctors made in terms of relaying information. Sometimes it was a simple email when there was an MRI to be read, and it just said one word, stable, or it was just the attached MRI report, and that was that. And then it was up to us to follow up. Interactions in today's day and age with everybody using their computers, they're not always going to be in person. And then social workers. Social workers can be good and bad. We had very positive experiences, and then we had experiences where social workers tried to help us and either dropped the ball or weren't that helpful at all. And then dealing with people in your insurance company or at the clinic or the hospital, dealing with bills. Those interactions tend to be a little bit less pleasant than some of the other interactions throughout the course of dealing with your clinical care team, but you're going to end up communicating with folks that are trying to walk you through the billing. And if you need assistance on that, by all means, either through your insurance company or, again, through a patient advocacy service or a friend that you can rely on. I chose the little picture of all the satellites lined up there because I thought it is a good representation of the transmission of information and the interactions that you can have when dealing with a serious or life-threatening illness, whether it's your own or a loved one's. I think this is self-explanatory, and I don't want to beat a dead horse in terms of when different interactions occur. So I'm going to move on unless there's anything burning in terms of question or anything somebody wants to share on this slide. But I think it's self-explanatory. Okay. This is now getting into the heart of what I really wanted to cover tonight, and that's how do we maintain positive interactions and how do we create positive interactions? If you're talking about physicians, I don't want to overgeneralize. We went one further there. I don't want to overgeneralize and say that every single physician that you're going to run into might have an ego, but a lot of them do. When you're dealing with a life-threatening condition or an illness such as cancer or MS or ALS, whatever it may be, you're going to end up talking with people that are extremely intelligent, extremely educated, and extremely overworked in terms of their schedule. And they don't have a tremendous amount of time to spend with you. And so I always found that it was helpful to listen first, even if I was seeing red. Whoops, sorry about that. Listening, it's a tool in any type of communication which helps set the tone for your interactions. If you do ask questions, if you have a question as to what you're being told, question respectfully, whether or not it's a nurse or whether it's a social worker, whether it's the physicians, whoever it is. And I'll tell you about some not so positive interactions on the next slide. Again, easing tensions in any relationship, whether it's within healthcare setting or outside of a healthcare setting, the old saying holds true. You're going to catch more flies with honey than you're with vinegar or bees, whichever you want to catch. So being able to listen, being able to demonstrate that you're respecting the individual's education or experience. It sounds really basic, but it goes a long way, especially if you come in with an agenda. Letting them get their agenda out first kind of allays any type of potential tension. Stay on the same level. So people don't like when you go over their head, especially physicians, be it a clinical oncologist going to a neuro-oncologist, or a attending physician going to their boss, or a resident or a fellow going above them to the attending. I never really worried too much about offending a resident or offending a fellow. But with that said, if you can work out the problem with the individual who is actually there on the ground working with you or treating you, treating your loved one, it's best to do that. Unless you have to go over their head for something that can't be taken care of by the individual you're working with, try and do everything in your power to stay on that same level. Time, number 4, be respectful of time. This is a frustrating point, but when you're dealing with a critical or life-threatening illness, it seems like you spend your life in a doctor's office or in a clinic or in a hospital, and you're told to show up at 9 a.m., 9:30 comes around, 10 o'clock comes around, 10:30 comes around, and you're still waiting. So you're respecting their time, but it doesn't seem like they're respecting your time. It's just the unfortunate nature of being in the healthcare system when you're dealing with a serious illness. And whereas they don't have a tremendous amount of time to spend with you, most physicians, some will, some are better than others. Some just want to see you and leave the room. You'll ultimately end up finding those individuals in your clinical care team that are willing to present their time to you in an unburdened fashion. And when you find somebody like that, it's a great relationship to maintain. And the same holds true to keeping a very positive relationship with that person in terms of, how to create that. If you do have their email address or the ability to email them, keep your emails short. Unless you're providing clinical data in records or updating them, try and keep your communications as short as possible. With that said, not all physicians or nurses or people on the clinical care team are going to provide you with their email. I always asked for their email, and I always made a point to try and get email from the clinical care team. In today's day and age, this is a lifeline to your caregiving team and your clinical team. And if I had an email address, I knew I could reach out and try and find somebody. So, but with that said, I always try to keep my interactions as short as possible with the clinical care team members. Number 6, it seems very simple, never threaten. But once you threaten, interactions and relationships seem to start to deteriorate. I'm a lawyer by training, and before my daughter was diagnosed, I did medical malpractice defense work. So I was defending a lot of obstetricians and gynecologists, hospitals, nursing homes, rheumatologists, some emergency room doctors as well. And seeing the interactions which led those physicians to actually sitting in my office and working with them, you could tell in the medical records when the relationship soured. And 9 times out of 10, it was because somebody threatened the doctor when things weren't going their way. I'm not gonna lie. I may have done this once or twice during the course of my daughter's treatment. Tensions rise when you're dealing with a family member that is in a situation where you're trying to save them. and it certainly impacted relationships. I had a very good relationship with one of my daughter's neuro-oncologists, and we were in New York trying to get on another clinical trial. My daughter just had an MRI. It was part of the process of enrolling her into this new clinical trial. The primary investigator who set up the clinical trial at the hospital in New York misread the MRI or failed to understand one component of what was being shown on the MRI. And her mother and I were pushing hard to get her on this trial. So I contacted the neuro-oncologist, the one that I really, really, truly liked. And I told her that she had to pick up the phone and call, or else we were going to go ballistic. And she stopped me and she said, I don't have to do anything. If you approach me kindly and ask me, I'm on the same page with you. I don't know that anything's going to change, but don't tell me I have to do anything. And it was a good lesson to learn. And our relationship took a hit, but thankfully to this day we remain friends, and I work with her in the research community. So when all else fails, say thank you. You know, sometimes we need to suck up our pride and suck up our ego and try and be kind, because kindness gets us further than being unkind. And when you're dealing with trying to get a physician or a nurse or a social worker or somebody to do something that you need them to do, kill them with kindness. Again, I can't say that always happened. There were some interactions in one of the hospital visits for my daughter where she was admitted for 5 days with a very serious infection in the line that was used for her MRIs and chemotherapy. And we were trying to tell them that she needed to be released because they had identified the infection. She was being treated for it, but her condition was deteriorating quickly. She did not like to be hospitalized. Imagine a 28-month-old child that can't take naps, that can't get sleep because people are always poking and prodding her at night, that is scared. Her psychological condition was deteriorating, and it was a Friday night, late in the night, and I did not hesitate to pick up the phone and call 2 of her doctors and tell them that they had to get her out of there, that it was unacceptable. And it was a rough patch, and the nurse coordinator on the floor was not very happy with me, but this is my daughter. I was trying to do everything in my power to save her and get her the best care possible. And, you know, I in retrospect may have gone just a little bit overboard, but, you know, it sometimes things don't go the way of positive interactions. So, anybody have anything they want to share in terms of an interaction tip or something that's worked for them to help them? Any questions? Again, I think a lot of these are self-explanatory, and, you know, overall, I think everybody understands the benefit of trying to maintain positive interactions and how to achieve those. But, you know, it can go a long way to either getting the treatment that you need or getting better care. If not, I'll move on and go to the next slide, which I think is a little bit more fun, talking about some of the what happens when things go bad.
I just want to, it makes you feel so comfortable when you have a physician who makes themselves available to you, because I know in my case, my neurosurgeon and his team, they made sure that they give their personal cell phones numbers to
Yeah.
my daughter, when I was ill, letting her know that you can call me at any time. And it was reciprocal because they were calling her to all hours of the night to give her updates, on my behalf.
Yeah.
So I find, I think that that's quite comforting, when you can deal with someone, a team of professionals in that manner.
Yeah, and that's definitely not the norm. But when you find a team of professionals like that that's willing to go that extra mile, it's worth trying to do everything in your power to ensure that the relationship is as positive as possible, because that's worth more than anything. So that's impressive. That's not the norm for sure, but if you can achieve that relationship, maintain it.
Yeah, I quite agree.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move on to the next one. I like the graphic because it really symbolizes to me. Sometimes I think we make things a little bit worse than they can be, especially when it comes to health and dealing with your own health condition or dealing with a loved one's condition. I always said that my daughter she was not a number. She was my daughter, and whereas she may have been a number to the hospital that was processing, 20, 30 kids that day in the pediatric oncology ward, or if she was getting an MRI and there were, 6 kids that needed MRIs that day, and some of them needed to be sedated to stay still like my daughter. She was not just a number. Unfortunately, she was a number to the hospital. But with that said, I was always going to do everything in my power to get her the best treatment and to get her the first MRI slot so she wouldn't have to go through the day without eating. And sometimes that didn't always work out well. So first and foremost, if things turn sour, cool heads prevail. Be calm. In the instance that I mentioned with respect to the nurse coordinator on the oncology floor, what happened is we sat down with one of the nurses and made a schedule for my daughter, and she took an afternoon nap. We told them we need it known that she needs to take an afternoon nap. It's critical to her health. It's critical to her mental well-being. And we also tried to stretch out the night visits as much as possible so that she wouldn't be woken up. And for the first afternoon, everything went well. And then it all fell apart. And then she fell apart. And things escalated quickly. And so about the third afternoon, we got a knock on my daughter's door, and it was the nurse coordinator. She sat us down and started talking to us, and immediately I went into the folded arms posture. I was ready to attack, and she told me that the nurses were starting to become afraid of me and scared of me, and it was making for unpleasant interactions. And I said, good, I want them to be afraid of me because I want them to know that my daughter needs to have better care. And it was not the most positive experience possible, and caused problems with some of the nurses who ultimately now I'm friends with. But at the time, it was very tense. It was heated. And, I needed to ensure that she was taken care of. So, don't threaten. I think we've gone over this again. Threatening does not work. If something goes massively wrong, well, just remain calm. Keep thinking about what the most important thing is, and that's the care and treatment of yourself or the patient. Threatening litigation, threatening to take it to a supervisor, things like that. That should be just a last resort. Be assertive. By no means shrink and wither. Especially just because somebody has an MD behind their name or is a doctor. Obviously, they have worked hard. They have the education. They have the knowledge. We should respect them. But if you need something, you need to be assertive for your own care. So if things are going sour in your relationship with your clinical care team, you need to assert your needs. Involve others if necessary. Again, patient advocates, patient advocacy services, family members, somebody else that you have a good relationship with in the clinical care team. It may not have to be the main doctor or the main nurse, but if there's somebody else involved that you can talk to and at least share your concerns, that's very helpful. 5 is seek assistance internally. It's 6 1/2 dozen off of number 4, involving others if necessary. If there's somebody else in the team, another nurse, a social worker, that's helpful. When we used to have issues at the clinic, the art therapist or child life specialist, we became very good friends with her, and she'd actually bring our concerns up to the physicians, and things would usually happen that way. Seek assistance externally. If it's from a patient advocacy service, if it's from a social worker at the hospital that may be interacting with the clinic you go to, or if you're seeing 2 or 3 different specialties, finding somebody that can interact on everybody's behalf. The friend who I told you about, whose son has an autoinflammatory condition, she has found somebody locally that will act as the quarterback for the entire team, that goes back and forth between NIH and the rheumatologist, allergist, and the neurology teams. Finding somebody that can act as a point person if you can't, or if it's you or a loved one, it's a significant help. And then, always make assessments as to what choices you have going forward. Again, the goal is to make sure that you or your loved one or whoever you're advocating for is getting the best care possible. Okay, we're going to move on and try and wrap up here quickly because I think we're running a little bit long here. Considerations. What role in the care or treatment does the interaction play? Is it critical? Is it reading an MRI? One interaction that I had with one of my daughter's main neuro-oncologists was after a critical MRI. We'd gotten 2 or 3 conflicting reads, and the main read was supposed to come from him and his team. And we went down to the hospital and met with him without my daughter. And, I was asking him, well, why aren't we getting your read first? Why are we getting all these other reads? And he looked at me and in a very unflattering way asked me if I was deposing him. And I looked back at him and I said, no, I'm just trying to get an answer from you. And, we would butt heads here and there. But in that case, it was a critical interaction because we were trying to assess what treatments to do with her and to move forward. And having 2 or 3 different MRI reads that weren't always on the same page was not helpful. Who am I interacting with? Are you interacting with a nurse, a social worker, somebody from your insurance company, your main doctor? What do you need? Again, depending on who you're interacting with, at what point in the clinical progression, that can guide you a little bit. Again, obviously the overarching thought exists to, try and be kind and respectful always. But, sometimes you need to push and be a little bit more assertive than at other times. What point do I want to get across? The point I was trying to get across to the neuro-oncologist was we need somebody to take control here, and it's not acceptable to have one doctor tell us that the MRI looks good, have another tell us that no, it looks like the tumor is growing. The point that I needed to get across there was I needed him to step up and talk to everybody else and tell them that his read had to be first, regardless. It's okay that people had conflicting opinions, but we were working with him primarily. Am I listening? Sometimes we can only hear what we want to hear, and in the case of my daughter, I didn't want to hear that she was progressing and that she was terminal and that there was nothing more to be done. And so there were points and times when I pushed and I wasn't listening. And, some things I regret, some things I don't. Is my point being heard? If I'm not getting my point across, then I need to think about a better way to get my point across, or somebody else to get my point across too. Because it's your life, it's your loved one's life, it's their care, and at the end of the day, it's in your hands, or it's in the hands of whoever you enlist to assist you with. What impact is your interaction going to have with the clinical care team? Some of the interactions that we had, they negatively impacted the ability to work with some of the nurses again. Some of them I didn't want working with us going forward. But with that said, if you are going to have an interaction with your clinical care team that puts somebody off, or that is so negative that they're not going to be involved again, or they're not going to look out for you, make the assessment up front before the interaction, what the impact is. You can't always assess that because of heat of the moment. And again, when you're dealing with life and death, things can get out of hand pretty quickly. And then what are my options? Who can I talk to? Do I have to talk to people on my clinical care team? Is there somebody else to vent to that I can tell my story to that doesn't need to be involved in the clinical care? It's a long road. Being diagnosed with a life-threatening or serious illness or terminal condition, it puts you on a long road, and sometimes the end isn't in sight. So thinking about all the interactions, how they work together is critical. The Seinfeld episode comes to mind, and I don't know how many of you are Seinfeld fans, but there's an episode where Elaine goes to a doctor, and she gets marked on her chart that she's a difficult patient. That chart follows her from doctor to doctor to doctor, and she can't get care because she's labeled a difficult patient. In the end, if it's you or if it's a loved one, you want to make sure that you're not being labeled a difficult patient. But again, by all means, if you need to assert yourself, assert yourself. And at the end of the day, if something does go wrong and you do need to push, for another solution, and that may be consulting with a lawyer, by all means, you're free to do that. And, it's your health. It's your loved one's health. So I went through the last couple of slides pretty quickly. We'll go on and try and finish up here. If anybody has any questions, I appreciate everybody's patience going through this, and questions and experiences. I think it really helps to try and create this community and share our experiences and what works and what doesn't work, and what may have worked for me may not work for you. So again, thank you all for listening and for participating. Does anybody have any questions, anything they want to share? No, it's late, so appreciate it. Appreciate the time. Okay. Well, if there aren't any questions, I thank you all for participating tonight. If you can log on to breakbod.com and check out the Caregiver and Advocacy group and join it, I'd appreciate it. And look forward to hopefully seeing everybody next week for another session. Thank you.